Hi, this is Jack Stanley, and I wanted to talk about communications a little bit. In this age of mass communication, where so much stuff is learned so quick and everything moves at the speed of practically light, it's interesting to note how things have changed over the years, and I wanted to give you a few examples which I thought would be fun. Now, for a long, long time in the history of man, writing, of course, was the way that you kept your understandings and how you learned and how you shared knowledge. But that was a rare thing. Books were very rare. You didn't see them. And documents were very rare as well. It was basically done for official pieces or government pieces or things of the like. Give you an example here as I reach over here. I want to share this with you, which I found rather fascinating. Now this very early document, is indeed a contract for one individual to sell themselves into serfdom, more or less to becoming a indentured servant, if that's the word we want to use. In fact, here's even the signatures at the back where they're signing. Now, this was in 1682, this document. Yeah, quite unusual, quite rare. And that's how things were done in those days. Very rarely would there be any documents that would be handed around the common people. If you look at it this way, years ago in governments, if there was a takeover of a government by another government, many people in the rural areas of these countries would not be aware of the change. It's just the way things are. Very little information ever traveled. People stayed in the same general areas. And therefore, no one ever got to know much of anything. And in many respects, they were probably pretty happy about that. But the thing is that everyone had their little network, their little town. And within that town, its histories, its morals, its fables, and its law were paramount. And it wasn't until the advent of newspapers where things started to change, and even then it was a difficult thing. I want to give you an example. Here's another interesting piece digging out here. This is in remarkable condition, this newspaper. This is Saturday, November the 16th. Actually, it's covering several days. It's from Saturday, November the 16th to Tuesday, November the 19th, 1776. In fact, I'm recording this on the 18th of November, 2015. Almost 240 years later. But here it is. This is the newspaper. It was printed in London, in England. And it's talking about the rebels. Now, who were the rebels? That was the colonists, fighting for their independence. The British Crown referred to them as rebels, which we were. We were rebelling. We were trying to secede from the British monarchy. And this gives lots of accounts of how bad the rebels are and of that scoundrel George Washington. And it's remarkable to read, but there's one problem with this. This newspaper is from November 15th to November 19th. However, the information in it is from June and July and the early August. Now, why is that so? Well, because the information didn't travel fast. If it was collected in the States, the information was collected, most probably printed. And then that printed copy would be sent on a sailing frigate that would sail like once a month. And when that ship was ready to sail, it would sail across the Atlantic, which would take a month. Then it would be received. It would be put in behind the other paperwork and eventually printed. It took months. So the information that is in here is old news. But it was new news, of course, where it was printed, which they didn't know anything. That's the way things were pretty much for a number of years. That's how people communicated. That's how everybody did everything. And it's interesting to note, as I said before, that most people would be blissfully unaware of vast changes in their government, in their world, in science, in nature, and everything would seem the same. And then things started to change very slowly. Of course, newspapers started getting their news earlier. Several reasons for this. First off, the steamship was invented. Now, if there's a paper being printed in England about the United States, let's say for, in the 1840s, it would be put on a steam packet. And that steamship would make it across the Atlantic in maybe 12 days, which was lightningly fast. Amazing. Other things that were kind of important as well was the development and invention of the telegraph. Now, the telegraph was the first, what you might call, the beginnings of the internet. Pretty amazing if you think about it. You could have your key and you could listen in to the world. Of course, your world would be within a short distance, of course. But you would hear what they heard from someone else who heard it from what they heard, and we passed along. It would be a game of telephone, one might say. And the problem was a lot of the information was not totally correct because they were writing this down lightning fast, a lot of the telegraph operators. And you'd get some information, but still the thing that's amazing is all of a sudden, something that was happening 2,000 miles away would be known about in a day or two. That's pretty incredible when you think that it took months for that newspaper that I just showed you to print the information. And then in the 1850s, they actually laid a cable between the British Empire and the United States, and they were able to send messages. In fact, President Buchanan and Queen Victoria sent messages to each other, and then the cable broke. And then another 10 years would have to wait before they tried to do it again. Got to remember, in the intervening years, we had the Civil War here in the United States. Now, the Civil War led to great advances. War always brings advances in technology. And in the Civil War, you had photography being used a great deal. It had been used in earlier wars, yes. Also, you had the first use of air reconnaissance. You had balloons. And of course, you had the telegraph. So you would receive messages a day after a great event, sometimes the same day, if the message got through fast enough. And that's pretty incredible when you think about it. And then everything stayed pretty much the same until another development came with communication. That's the telephone. Of course, the telephone didn't work too well, and the telephone was limited because it couldn't travel far. And that would be a problem with it for a number of years, and that wouldn't be rectified until improvements by a bunch of individuals. Of course, Bell, Edison, Berliner, and Blake would have a lot to do with the development of the telephone. And let's not forget Watson, who was who was Bell's assistant. So all of these individuals move that along. And suddenly now we can get telephone messages or telegraph and telephone information about an event. And by the late 1890s, people are receiving messages all over the world within a day of what has happened. And that's pretty incredible. But then something amazing was going to happen. A little invention that was developed in the 1870s by Thomas Edison was called Etheric Force. It's something we never hear about, but Etheric Force was basically something he observed of a spark flying through the air between two metal pieces. And he developed a system with towers where he could send these tones back and forth. And it was cute. Didn't know what it was. That's why he called it Etheric Force, because it went through the ether. He didn't know what else to call it. Well, someone bought those patents. His name was Marconi. And of course, Marconi today is known as the father of wireless. There's some contention to that. Some people throw in Tesla as well. And of course, between the work of a number of individuals, wireless became a device that would spread information far faster than either by telephone or by the telegraph, because it was, in many cases, limited only by how far the signal could go through the air. And at night, it could go much further. And that led to the development of something that's right behind me here, actually. I can turn it on. The radio. Can't see it too well, but there's an old radio here. And radio is neat, and of course you got recorded sound, where things could be recorded and preserved. And our information got better and better. But one of the things that I find interesting in comparison to today, in this world of instant communication, think about this. I mean, most recently we had that incident in France. And of course, there's always things happening, and things in space, and things in politics. Is the rapid amount of communication and the rapid amount of response, and the absolute waterfall of information flying through the air. It's too much in many respects. But this also changes us as a people, if you think about it. When I talked before about these rural communities that wouldn't know if changes took place or not. Today, everybody knows everything, and there is very little of that rural community left. It's vanishing. The world is changing. The world is changing so fast it doesn't realize how fast it's changing. That's what I find most amazing about it. So I thought I would talk about this. I thought it would be kind of fun to look at how communication has changed. Because here I am speaking to you on YouTube, which is something 20 years ago I could never even thought of. You know, it's amazing. I am old enough to remember going to the movies and seeing newsreels in the movies before the movie would start, so you could see what was happening in the news. Because news programs were 15 minutes and they were pretty sad affairs. It didn't change until the time of the Kennedy assassination in 1963. That was the first time we had news going all day. And ever since then, news has been on the rise, one might say. So, without further ado, let me just say that I hope you enjoyed this. And when you get a message now, and things go on, just remember that it's only a recent thing. It's only been a decade since YouTube. It's only been a century since radio. It's only been 125 years since wireless. And The telephone, 1876. Telegraph, 1844. It's not that long. And so, remember, when you get a news article, or you get an email, or you get a message, just remember how simple, how fast, and how amazing our world has become. Thank you.